Well, if I'm going to comment upon what you said, am I going to comment on it, or do I have to ask a question? If I comment on it, and then I can turn it perhaps into a question. Let's ask ourselves, what, in Gurdjieff's teaching, what is positive in Gurdjieff's teaching? What can we take as a positive from Gurdjieff's teaching? Because when we look at Gurdjieff and what he was teaching, then he was teaching everything that we can't do. Things we can't do. And things we don't have. Qualities we don't have. So it's easy to say, well, it's entirely negative. Because Gurdjieff is teaching, well, we're not really conscious. And Ouspensky took this on board as a major part of his teaching. Gurdjieff says, we can't observe ourselves. It's just not possible. We can't remember ourselves. We can't not identify. We can't even not manifest when we experience an unpleasant emotion, and so on. So the question comes about, what is there in Gurdjieff's teaching that is positive? What is Gurdjieff actually teaching that we can take on board as ordinary men and women as a positive? Because everything seems to be doom and gloom, everything is negative. We can't do this. We don't have these qualities. So what is positive in Gurdjieff's teaching? Well, what is positive in Gurdjieff's teaching is Gurdjieff is saying we should have these qualities. These are all the qualities Gurdjieff has carefully selected, what he's teaching, so that what he's actually showing us are all the things that we can't do as ordinary men and women, but which we should be able to do as normal men and women. Now, this leads us to the crucial distinction that I want to make here, because in listening to what you've said is not Gurdjieff's teaching. What you've said is completely false. Now, I don't know how it is. I don't want to be critical of you yourself personally, but I would say that in the context in which we're speaking, there is, of course, a reading panel. So that before you can speak, you have presented your talk, what you want to say, to a reading panel, and they have presumably passed it as acceptable in this context. And this is the way the world works. So I'm not criticising you personally here. I'm criticising, or I'm commenting upon the reading panel, because what you have said is not Gurdjieff's teaching. Now, Gurdjieff was teaching all the things we can't do, but which, as normal men and women, we should be able to do. Now, what does this mean? It can mean two things. And the sense in which you have taken it, I think, is the sense in which Ouspensky and the Gurdjieff tradition takes this. That is to say, we have these qualities that we should have, but we don't have. And so we must develop these qualities. Qualities such as self-observation, self-remembering, which specifically you mentioned. But this is not Gurdjieff's teaching. This is not what Gurdjieff says. And in the context in which you've spoken about self-remembering, we can take the quote from In Search of the Miraculous by Ouspensky, a very exact quote that Ouspensky gives from Gurdjieff. This is very exact. This is what Gurdjieff said. He said, we come to the conclusion that we must remember ourselves. But we can remember ourselves only if we have in ourselves the energies for self-remembering. So we can't remember ourselves as ordinary men and women, but we come to the conclusion, once we realise this, that we must remember ourselves, that we should be able to remember ourselves. But we can remember ourselves only if we have in ourselves the energies for self-remembering. So Gurdjieff is not saying that we must develop self-remembering in us, in ourselves. He's saying self-remembering is a quality of the normal man. We already have it. It doesn't manifest in us. We don't have it as ordinary men and women because we don't have the energies for self-remembering. So we are not developing self-remembering in ourselves. We can remember ourselves only if we have in ourselves the energies for self-remembering. We are developing, and this is Gurdjieff's teaching, the energies for self-remembering. And similarly with all the other qualities that Gurdjieff is saying, as ordinary men and women as we are, men and women in the street, as people, we don't have these qualities. Why don't we have these qualities? It's not because we don't have them, full stop. It's because we don't have the energies for these qualities which already exist in us to manifest. So we are not developing in ourselves self-remembering. We are developing in ourselves the energies for self-remembering. So we have to start to look very precisely at where these energies come from. And if you look at the book In Search of the Miraculous by Ouspensky, the Gurdjieff tradition, you can see that Gurdjieff went on with Ouspensky to produce 2 food diagrams showing where these energies come from. The energies. So if I am to criticise or comment upon what you've said, and perhaps make it into a question to conform to the format that we're using here, then I would say that what you have said is just completely false. We are not developing in ourselves self-remembering. How could we? We already have this. It's a quality of a normal man. We already have all these qualities. Why else would Gurdjieff point out that we can't observe ourselves, that we can't remember ourselves, that we can't not identify? All these are things, qualities that we have already as normal men and women. But they don't manifest in us because we don't have the energies for them to manifest. This is Gurdjieff's teaching. So it's not about striving to develop in ourselves qualities, because we already have these qualities. They just don't manifest in us as they should. This is what Gurdjieff says. Indeed, I think even Ouspensky says this. They don't manifest in us as they should because we don't have the energies for these qualities. So here we have Gurdjieff's teaching in contrast, and this is what I suggest to you, in contrast to what you have said. You are talking about developing by means of efforts on our part, by means of work on ourselves, self-remembering in us. So that, like a muscle, it will develop in us and get stronger and stronger, and we will be more and more able to remember ourselves. This is not Gurdjieff's teaching. Gurdjieff never said this. This is Ouspensky's teaching, and clearly it's your teaching. But it's not what Gurdjieff was teaching. Gurdjieff was teaching we can't remember ourselves as ordinary men and women. We should be able to remember ourselves. Why should we be able to remember ourselves? Because we already have self-remembering as a possibility in us, as a quality in us. But it doesn't manifest in us because we don't have the energies for it to manifest. So this is Gurdjieff's teaching. We're not developing self-remembering in ourselves. It's already there. We need the energies for self-remembering. We come to the conclusion that we must remember ourselves. But we can remember ourselves only if we have in ourselves the energies for self-remembering. This is Gurdjieff's teaching. This is what he says very exactly to Ouspensky. Nothing to do with developing in ourselves self-remembering or any other qualities that you might dream up for us to develop. Gurdjieff is saying we should have these qualities, which means they already exist in us, but they don't manifest. And they don't manifest because we don't have the energies for these qualities to manifest. So Gurdjieff's teaching is not about self-remembering, it is about the energies for self-remembering, which I suggest to you, if you think about it seriously, is a completely different subject. Completely different teaching to the traditional teaching ascribed to Gurdjieff, which I suggest comes from Ouspensky. So, do I need to make that into a question? Because I don't think you can answer it.